Welcome to Team Gut Girls, the podcast for anyone who's ever unbuttoned their jeans at 10 a.m., mapped out every public washroom in a 10-kilometer radius, or wondered why one bite of food can ruin an entire day. We talk about bloating, constipation, diarrhea, reflux, nausea, abdominal pain, histamine chaos, and all the quiet gut symptoms you're told to just live with. Join naturopathic doctors Dr. Whitney Baxter, Dr. Christina Carew, and Dr. Dominique Vanier. Your gut is talking, and we're here to help you translate. You're with Team Gut Girls now. Let's dig in.
And before we dive in, just a quick note. This podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. It's not meant for medical advice and doesn't replace working with your own healthcare provider. We're sharing general information, not diagnosing or treating anyone. Please always talk with your physician or licensed healthcare practitioner prior to making changes to your health, medications, or supplements.
Welcome back to another episode of Team Gut Girls, where we're turning to our topic on causes of bloating because there are so many. And today we're sticking to the basics.
So sometimes it's not what you eat, but it might be how you're eating or how much you're eating all at once or how frequently you eat or how you're eating. So are you in the middle of driving your car and trying to eat a bowl of cereal, which I literally saw someone do the other day? Or are you sitting down calmly at lunch and having your lunch break and actually taking a break, or are you scrolling your phone? So all those things can affect how your body digests your food.
And we've all done it, but picture this scenario. So you're rushing through lunch between meetings and you're thirsty. So you're going to quickly chug some water after your meal. In the afternoon, you're in the mood for a can of bubbly. And then later you have a large dinner close to bedtime. And by the end of the day, your pants feel tight, you're gassy, you're uncomfortable. And this actually may just spill over to how you feel the next morning too.
And these are all like really simple things that we do day to day. And sometimes we don't do them every day. So it's hard to link why we're bloated. But we're going to talk about this, why it may cause you even worse in your bloating. And most importantly, after this episode, we're going to teach you some basic tips that you can actually get started to do today, but don't require cutting out large food groups or blaming your body. Because bloating can feel really complicated, but sometimes the first step is just getting really curious about these basic things.
So what's trending this week with all this talk about bloating? I'm sure both of your Instagram feeds are similar to mine, filled with bloating options and tools and ads telling us that bloating is a problem. And while it might be a problem, we have lots of episodes about why bloating might be a problem for you. It may not always be a problem. And so that's one of the things we want to talk about today is, is a situation caused or being caused by something, or is it as a result of something? So as always, it's really important to track your symptoms and speak to your doctor if you're concerned, but also starting with some really basic eating behaviors and things that we can do that we're going to talk about today might be helpful in helping you to figure out if something that you're doing might be causing some of your bloating instead of spending a lot of time on expensive supplements and things that you've seen online.
So we have a recurring segment on our podcast. This is the myth busting segment, and let's talk about myths and break them down. So myth number one is that bloating is always caused by too much gas. So Whitney, walk us through that.
Makes sense when we're bloated, like something's in there, right? We feel like it's gas, but it's not always. Of course, gas is a major player, but bloating is more about the sensation and the movement. And we talk about this a lot on our podcast. Some people produce a more normal amount of gas, but they feel it more intensely. And they've done this in studies where they've actually measured the gas in two different people's intestines, and one is saying that they feel more bloated or more inflamed where there isn't actually excess gas. And today we'll talk about how the gas gets in our gut. But typically when someone is feeling it more intensely, we know that this is called visceral hypersensitivity. So the gut is the viscera and it's just hypersensitive. And basically the nerves are just more reactive. So if you think of a balloon, one person's balloon in their stomach may stretch easily without much discomfort, without feeling the normal gases and foods moving through. Whereas another person's balloon may feel tight and uncomfortable with just a small amount of air or just a small amount of gases and food moving through. So I think that's really key for people to understand. Then when we're recommending things like diaphragmatic breathing or deep belly breathing or slowing down meals, that there's a point to that our gut and brain can just rewire themselves instead of being so overly reactive and worried all the time. So that amount of gas does matter. Of course, sometimes there is more gas, but also how sensitive the gut is too. Another piece we'll talk about a lot today is how slower movement through the digestive tract when the food and gas is just sitting around for longer. So that's making us feel distended, creating pressure. The microbiome can have a party and ferment these foods for longer. And this is the one thing that we're screening for when we see our bloated patients is if their gut is moving effectively.
Okay, so
yes. Oh, go ahead.
So that might explain why two people can eat the same meal and then only one person may feel this type of bloating.
Yeah, bloating is so individual. Your gut microbiome, how your gut is moving, how these foods and gases are moving through this whole gut tube, or just one long tube. We talk about in other episodes about our sleep hormones. Today, we'll dive into meal size. We've talked in other episodes about mast cells. So these are all affecting how you feel after you eat. And this is why broad food rules don't work for everybody. So there's a lot of research and evidence into the low FODMAP diet or going dairy-free, but it doesn't work for everybody. So today we'll talk about how to start with the basics and see if just how you're eating and the meal size is impacting you, or how one person can bloat from carbonated drinks and another person can't. So we'll get into all of this today.
So on that topic, myth number 2, if someone gets bloated right after they eat, does that mean they have a food intolerance? Are they sensitive to things like gluten or dairy or something else like peppers if it happens as soon as they eat? What do you think, Whit?
It makes sense. If we eat, we're going to look at what we just ate. If all of a sudden you're feeling like you need to rip your pants off, so unbutton that button. But it's a really big myth, and it's something that's talked about as an easy solution, and there's a test for it. So, and it's so many people in my practice, I'm sure your practice is adding a lot of food sensitivity. And I need to talk about why I don't trust food sensitivity tests. And that can be a really hard way to meet somebody. But it's one way. So there's all these causes of bloating. Food sensitivity is, but if we're introducing food into the gut and the gut's not ready to digest, or it's still digesting that last meal. So how we ate, when we eat, or even how much air we're swallowing, that can be why you're feeling those symptoms right after your meal. So even if the food itself is completely healthy and normal, you've never reacted to that food before, it can cause symptoms based on how you're eating. And we'll get into that. And we're going to hopefully save you a lot of money on food sensitivity tests and microbiome tests at your first appointment somewhere if we can improve on these basics.
Okay, so myth number 3, people often talk about eating fast in relation to overeating or weight, but does eating quickly really affect somebody's bloating?
Yes, it can. And we'll talk about this too. It's one of the way that gas gets into our gut. So we'll talk about 3 main mechanisms of how gas gets in the tube. And when we're eating really quickly, we can swallow more air without noticing it. It's called aerophagia. It literally means air eating. When you're eating quickly, maybe you're chatting, you're also chewing less thoroughly. So now more larger components are getting down through your gut into your microbiome. This can make digestion feel heavier, slower, and just uncomfortable.
I totally have airphagia. I eat fast and I talk while I eat. I will learn something today. Okay, so it's a point, not always too much gas, but it's like how the gas gets in, which clearly I'm doing a lot of these things. So walk us through, how do we know?
I think we all do, like, especially with naturopathic doctors, like we make our own day. Sometimes our day is just, we have to actually physically put a lunch break in our day
Oh, yeah.
to sit and eat our meals, which, yeah, we're all guilty of, I'm sure. We eat through lunch. Okay, so the three main mechanisms that we introduce in those bits, and we'll go through and it will make more sense as to why we're telling you to slow down and enjoy your meal and be more mindful. So there's three mechanisms of how gas gets in that tube. The first is swallowed air. So there's increased gas coming in, and we can do this without realizing it. And it's very common. So things like carbonated drinks, eating quickly, like we mentioned, chatting while eating, gulping drinks while eating. Some people are gulpers. Even if we're drinking while we're eating, that can just introduce more air, chewing gum, and then things like poor fitted dentures in some individuals, poor fitted CPAP machines. So there's a lot of ways that that air can get into the tube. Interesting. And the next we'll go through a lot today is why gas isn't moving through the gut effectively. So we've introduced this a lot in our podcast on bloating because motility is a huge thing. So the movement of the gut. A big one we'll introduce is the migrating motor complex. So it's this big flush sweep that goes through the gut. We'll introduce some controversies here in the research, but essentially we're thinking that this isn't working properly. So this is where meal timing comes into play. So if you're someone who snacks a lot, grazes throughout the day, and you're not leaving 2 to 3 hours in between your meals, we'll talk about how this can cause some bloating or just some indigestion. Next is not letting your gut move or expand. We're all told that we need to have a flat stomach, and I just don't think that's very nice to put that on our bodies. That gut needs to move, and that food needs to move somewhere. So are we moving throughout the day? So we'll talk about some things here, some tips you could do. And then other things like pelvic floor distension, because if we think about our core and our abdomen, the pelvic floor is at the base of that, and our diaphragm's on top of that. So we talk about deep belly breathing a lot, but pelvic floor physiotherapy can be awesome if we're bloated or maybe more constipated. So we'll talk about things that you can do, how like your lifestyle, your eating habits, but definitely tune into our other episodes on motility issues like thyroid, insulin resistance, diabetes, hormone imbalances, and connective tissue disorders and other conditions. And then finally, you'll hear in other episodes, but the third way that gas can get in that tube is the gas production by the microbiome. So some species actually create gas, or they are fermenting the foods that the fibers that we're eating. And some other species can eat that gas. So a balance of the microbiome is so important. Okay, so if you've ever filled out a naturopathic intake form, you know that we are obsessed about these little details. What's your meal time like? What's your lunch time like? What's family life like? I have 3 kids. My mornings are nuts. I don't sit and eat breakfast lately until I get to work. So how can we work with you to make these meal times work best for you? It's what we do a lot in our jobs. And how can we help you just listen to your body and when it might need more of? So let's start by going through the first mechanism, too much gas getting into the tube. So excess swallowed air can get trapped in the stomach or small intestine because there are valves that close off these compartments. Sometimes if we eat too quickly or a carbonated beverage, we can burp up that excess gas. But if it's getting trapped, it's typically leading to the feeling of bloating or distension or fullness in the abdomen, less often belching. And some people have a condition where they can't belch. Do you guys remember the term? Again, it's in the new digestion Rome criteria. There's a term for it, but it's a thing now. It's recognized. And I've met some people who cannot belch. So
It's even like quite uncomfortable.
yeah. Like the stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we know that eating quickly has been linked with more swallowed air. And again, the symptoms that somebody would feel would be this like post-meal fullness, pressure, bloating, this discomfort that we described. Simply slowing down your meals can really help some people.
And like slowing down is actually a pretty vague term, right? So like, what does that even mean? And so if we think about a lot of diet culture, actually, they talk a lot about eating slower because you recognize being full faster. And lots of cultures will say like eat to 80% fullness. But if we're eating so fast, we don't even know if we're 80% full. So things that can help is like actually putting your fork actually all the way down between bites, chewing food until the texture is soft before swallowing. So I'm trying not to get chunks in there. Avoid talking while you're chewing. So trying to be mindful of like doing one activity at a time, and gulping water or drinks while you're eating can also increase that swelling of air because you kind of like so many things going on at once. Trying to extend the time of your meal. So when we think about like blood sugar and we talk about blood sugar, we always say like, oh, like from the time you start eating until you end, your blood sugar sort of returns to normal. It's like 2 hours. But some people will eat in like 5 minutes, and we're giving you sort of a, 20 to 30 minute window. So trying to take some of that time so you actually like enjoy your food and also like have time for it to get into the system and get digested instead of sort of inhaling it. Trying not to eat while you're driving, but the rushing, scrolling, uh, feeling like running from one place to another. And sometimes that's hard, right? Our jobs are really busy, our life is really busy, or you have other things you need to do. And nothing that we're suggesting is always like you have to do it 100% of the time, but you might notice that even in doing it 50% of the time, that bloating really has changed for you. So it can help you to identify, is that the reason that you need to help to prevent the bloating, or you'll know that, you're eating fast and you might get more bloating that day, instead of going deep into a lot of the interventions we've talked about on the podcast so far. So maybe it's just making sure that ruling in or out, is this a part of the problem?
And I think especially when I was going to say, I think also that if somebody is too busy to not eat when they're driving, then that's more of a reflection of their life and how their systems are set up. And maybe that's actually more of a place to look first so that somebody can actually carve out 20 minutes to sit down and eat their lunch.
Yeah. Especially when like things are making sense. Like you can't make a link of, the food. Every time I eat cheese, I feel bloated. Well, not every time I eat cheese, I feel bloated. Or it's happening more between 3 and 4 p.m. I hear that a lot too. Well, what was your lunch? That's like cheat day. Lunch was stressful. Work is stressful. Ending work is stressful. And so kind of looking at the picture.
Mm-hmm.
So a sneaky one, things that are really popular lately, I love them. Carbonated beverages can just add gas to the tube. Sparkling water, those soda streams were a huge hit a few years ago. Soda, diet pops are really popular. Some kombuchas, people think it's good for their gut and it's just making everything worse. And for some people, it just can add to an orally sensitive system, or maybe they've already eaten quickly or something else is going on, or some people just don't tolerate it. And you usually know that pretty quickly if you don't tolerate these. Okay, so that was swallowed air or more gas being introduced in. So let's talk about how the gut moves. So we'll talk about the various ways that there are hormones and the nervous system, and there's all these muscle movements. And it's going to make more sense for when we say how to eat and how frequently to eat, those large meals, all of these things, and how they will influence your bloating. So this is the big one. The gut has a few different mechanisms or a way that it propulsively moves things through the gut. So if you think of this like a conveyor belt moving your groceries, so what's slowing down the process? You've lined up, okay, the line wasn't so bad. You plunked your groceries on, the two workers are chatting away, and something is really slow. Well, they're ringing through things fast. The baker's going really fast, but that belt, that mechanism isn't moving very quickly. So that's where this motility of the gut comes in.
Yeah, so let's break down these movement patterns. As it relates to peristalsis and expulsion, the purpose is to really just to move the stomach contents from the stomach to the small intestine. And this is an automatic process. And it's automatic because our smooth muscles are doing it without us consciously knowing that they're doing it. And in order to do this work, we need to be in a calm state. When we are calm, we have more blood flow to our gut. We're in a rest and digest state, and our vagus nerve is the main nerve responsible for taking over this process and helping. And it helps move the food and gases throughout the gut. And, our nervous system, like Whitney just mentioned, also plays a large role, and various hormones as well released along the gut are triggered in response to this stretch of the tube from food leaving the stomach and then moving through to the small intestine.
Like sometimes that vagus nerve piece is the reason why we feel anxious and we don't want to eat, right? Or you feel like you're going to vomit. It's the same kind of idea. It's like that rest and digest is it moving things smoothly in the direction we want them to go in. And so once the food gets into that stomach, it churns and mixes up digestive enzymes, and then bile gets added in a little further down the tube and starts to break down the chyme. So chyme is that broken down food in that sort of, I always think of it kind of like an oatmeal capacity. And so the reason we're breaking things down is we need to have these really tiny molecules in order to be able to have them absorbed into the bloodstream. So our bloodstream, when we look at our blood, if we cut ourselves, we don't see little tiny molecules in it. Unless we're under a microscope. So we need to break that steak dinner down into something that's now really small and usable so that the body can process. And that's another automatic process. We don't have to sit there and think, oh, now I need to digest my food. Instead, the small intestine and the circular muscles around the gut tube, they move everything along. And once things leave the stomach until they get through the small intestine, which is that large windy cord, it's 23.5 feet. So it's from the 3-point line to the basketball net. It's somewhere between 2 to 6 hours for the nutrient absorption. And sometimes it stays a little longer.
And this whole motion of like moving down through the tube and mixing it all up, this continues into the colon. So it's going to shape the stool and propulse it forward, allowing it to create stool. So it's going to absorb water, it's going to absorb more nutrients, our microbiome is there. So it's all moving through.
So what triggers these movements? Is it food in the gut, or is it possibly no food in the gut? So for example, when I'm hungry, my tummy gurgles. Is that what's happening?
There's a lot of things that will trigger these movements, and we both need to eat meals in a calm, rested state so our brain and the gut can communicate with each other to be like, okay, there's food in our system. I feel the stomach is stretched. Now the colon, the small intestine is stretched. That will feed back to release more hormones, will let more movements and digestive enzymes flow. So we both need to eat, but then we also need to not eat, which we'll get into in a minute. But another thing is that sometimes people feel like they need to go to the bathroom right after they eat, or they feel things moving really quickly. And there's something called the gastrocolic reflex. So as soon as you eat something and your stomach stretches, it's going to signal the colon that there's food coming. You need to move things out to make more room. So in some individuals, that's faster, and some that's slower. But otherwise, it should all work to allow things to move through. So that's like food and eating, the process triggering itself to get moving. But there's something you may or may not have heard of, is this migrating motor complex, and I introduced it earlier. It's essentially a whole wave that happens to push all the excess food and digestive enzymes and bacteria, microbes through in between meals. So there's multiple phases. Each gets progressively longer and stronger to really propulse things through. And it occurs when we're fasting. So every 90 to 100 minutes. So a long time fasting. So overnight or between meals. And snacking can prevent this. So any calories and nutrition in can prevent this from happening. So some people who are snacking between meals, or they eat like 2 hours after their last meal, they're not getting this whole wave pushing through their gut, this housekeeper wave. What do you guys think about this? How do you talk to patients about this? What have you read about this?
Yeah, so I think that it's a common thing that we see in a lot of our patients that have IBS. So they have like diarrhea or constipation. We see it in people that get bloating. We're seeing it in people that might have an fungal or bacteria overgrowth that subsequently affects this. We know sort of gut brain interaction we think affects the MMC. So I mean, there's lots that we don't know about it, but there's also some role that we do know about it that says, like, well, if the conveyor belt, that's what I always used to call the MMCs, like the conveyor belt of the small intestine isn't really moving everything forward and it gets stuck, then we might see all these other things happening. And so when we're thinking about like, how do we fix things or how do we change things? There are things that help us to digest, but maybe we also think about things that help us propel, right, to move things forward. And so certainly one thing can be spreading out your meals. So trying to have a meal that's sort of 30 to 60 minutes. We've talked to some of you that, eat in 5 minutes. So 30 to 60 minutes as a sort of meal time with, 3 hours at least in between so that the whole process can happen and everything can be empty before we start again. So think about it like waiting for the dishwasher to completely empty so you can take the dishes out to put the new dirty dishes in. You're not going to stop it halfway, put the dirty dishes and keep it going. Or listen, it's not going to be super effective. And then having, some people need to have, small frequent meals based on their glucose or diet or things like that. And so even trying to space those out throughout the day so that they're still getting some window for things to keep moving. So the idea of like snacks, like kids have snacks, kind of okay because the kids sort of burn through the energy really fast and they're not eating a really big snack. But adults that have snacks, like their teachers, they may notice that this creates some more of that bloating or having not that fast a window.
And also, if you end up having a snack when you should have had lunch, is then you may be more hungry like an hour later, and then that kind of defeats the whole purpose because you're hungry. So you are, you're not leaving that 90-minute that you need to. One of the most common questions I'll ask my patients who have digestive issues is whether they're eating close to bed, like how long they are waiting between dinner and their bedtime. Because what I do find is that if you're eating close to bed, for a lot of people, that can affect their digestion the next morning. It also can sometimes sabotage somebody's sleep. Some people are sensitive enough where it increases your temperature overnight. And then if you're not sleeping, that can also affect your digestion.
Yeah.
And like you mentioned too, it depends on like the nutrition that you are eating. Are you getting enough protein at each meal? Did you sit and eat that mindfully? Did your stomach digest that effectively? And are you still hungry after? Just kind of navigating what you had and troubleshooting that meal quantity and what you've had is sometimes really helpful.
And so as we sort of talked about, like the MMC is really a cyclical, right? It's like a 90 to 120 minute cycle. And so if we break that cycle by like throwing an extra snack in there or grazing, then what ends up happening is it sort of doesn't complete the cycle. And so that's where we can get some things left behind, or we may see increased gas and bloating. And so thinking when we're back to the tracking, when are you getting bloated and what's happened, in advance of that bloating may be really helpful to figure out if this is a piece of the puzzle.
Yeah. And it's a quick, easy test to take a couple days, just kind of allow some more spacing. Some people, and it's important to have like more nutrition and nutrients in the mornings. So maybe that big, larger fast is happening once a day, not in between each meal. It's happening in between lunch and dinner. If you need to, like me, have something in the morning and then have more of a meal and I get to work when it's quiet and calm. And then my largest fasting window is later in the afternoon. So my gut is still getting a break and a big sweep. But that can be helpful to just troubleshoot for some people. But let's summarize this MMP, migrating motor complex, because it is really important, especially when it comes to kind of gut maintenance and bloating. So we talked about meal spacing, frequency grazing with this migrating motor complex. Christina, why don't you walk us through why it's important for the gut?
So we want to make sure that the body has time to like both break down the food and secretions, move it along, and clear everything out before the next meal arises. So anything left behind increases bloating. Short intervals of time in between meals mean they kind of like stack up, and so it's like kind of train cars on a track where things are getting too close together. And so anytime the stomach needs to empty, it needs a space to empty into. So if there isn't space, then you're going to feel more nauseous, and maybe even sometimes people will say, I have a sore stomach, or it feels like it can't empty, or it feels really heavy. So think about it as that big long tube needs to have each segment of it emptied for the next thing to happen.
And there is some research that does support the MMC role, though some people would say it's a little bit controversial. So we do have observational and interventional studies that suggest that allowing these longer intervals, specifically 3 to 4 hours in between meals, can improve gas-related symptoms for some people. And we did do a whole episode on SIBO, and it is thought that the migrating motor complex does play a role in SIBO, but the research tends to be a little bit older. So we may do a part 2 episode on that and talk more about that next time.
Yeah. Cause or effect.
Right.
Yeah.
Chicken or egg.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. We also always talk about the quantity of food. So what about larger meals, Christina? How does this impact our bloating?
Yeah. So as you can imagine, putting more volume in stretches the stomach more. And so just like a suitcase that's overpacked or a bag that's overpacked, it's much harder to get something out of it if there's no space to move anything around. And so it's pretty common that when people eat a larger meal, it takes a lot longer for it to empty, not just because of the fact that there's more food to process, but also the ability for it to move around and to be able to break down the food is hindered because there's not a lot of space in between. And so when we have more substrate or product that's also in the intestinal tube, we have more opportunity for bacteria and gas, and also more feeling of distension and fullness, right? Like everyone's had that meal where they lie down on the couch after and just hold their belly. But if once in a while it's not a problem, if we're having that kind of sensation every day, then we're having these large meals that are slowing everything down along the chain. And so we also may see that bloating is a result of all of these things happening. So the idea of like eating your meals across the day in like 3 meals instead of eating everything all at once actually has some benefit from a digestive standpoint.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And we did touch on the eating close to bedtime before, but what's also important is that if somebody eats and then lies down right away or too soon after a meal, that can slow gastric emptying and can affect intestinal transit. It can definitely promote reflux. I remember in my last pregnancy, I had to eat because I was so hungry, but I ate close to bed and then I laid down and it was just like, I can't win. But we want to be able to eat and then stay sitting up for a certain period of time. And this whole lying down right after you eat may permit gas to pool or be perceived more intensely, like that visceral hypersensitivity piece we discussed earlier. And circadian rhythms also affect gastrointestinal motility too, so we can't discount that. There is some research that shows overnight late eating is associated with slower postprandial clearance, so postprandial meaning right after a meal, as well as more reflux. And many patients report worse bloating when they eat large late meals. So I will say, like, when we see things in research and we can see it match up in the conversations we have with patients, I find that quite interesting because this is definitely an area where I do find people see improvement when they make these small changes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like having your larger meals, breakfast and lunch, just might help your gut if things are slowed down or just like how your day flows. Okay, so another way that gas is prevented from moving through your tube. So now we're kind of talking outside of the way the gut is moving, but not letting your gut move and expand. So I think it's just kind of reshaping what we've been taught through like social media, and having to have this perfectly flat stomach, I think, is evil. Obviously, like uncomfortable, painful bloating and distension every single day is abnormal, but a little bit of bloating and sometimes rethinking about your bloating, how you're moving throughout the day, the clothes you're wearing could be really helpful. So as best as we can, we should be moving or walking after our meals. This is also a blood sugar piece. Those muscles soak up blood sugar outside of the work of insulin. So it's helping your insulin and your hormones and your cardiovascular health to move after just from that alone. And it does like help your body and get things going.
My patients call this the fart walk.
I love that.
Yeah, I love that. There's literally, if you Google fart walk, there are a million things about it. About like just getting things moving and getting the gas.
Yes. Go by a busy street if you're with someone who doesn't love it. It's normal. Love it. Yeah, we all like kind of sit to drive to work, sit sometimes throughout the day. We're not getting like that break. Do you sit and eat for that 30 minutes or do you go for your walk? It's so tough. It's so tough. So where can you move? And then yoga stretches or gentle movements. There's some great like YouTube yoga for digestion. Some simple postures in the evenings or after that large meal can really help move the gut. Looser pants. Looser pants have changed my life. It's less trending now. I'm like a millennial mom trying to be cool, but the baggy pants are great. But tight pants actually like presses in and it does trigger a little bit of bloating. Have you guys, I've like read about this and I've seen this. I feel it. Yeah, it's definitely a thing. It hurts and it like triggers some visceral hypersensitivity and some bloat. So loosen pants. It's okay to switch into comfortable fitting pants in the evening. And some bloating is normal. The food and gases do have to go somewhere. Again, we've been conditioned to think that there should be no bloating. We're embarrassed or we're trying to hide it. So we may also not be engaging our core muscles effectively if we're tired and from sitting all day. My husband always tells me to stand up straight at the end of the day I'm tired. But if you do engage those core muscles, if you work with a pelvic floor physiotherapist or just a physio, it can be so helpful to just rewire that muscle movement pattern. Or osteopaths are awesome for this too. We talk about deep belly breathing, how that can there's something called abdominal phrenic dyssynergia, where the core and the diaphragm are coordinating effectively. So typically our diaphragm should rise so the abdominal wall can come in to allow for the expansion of that gut tube with things moving through it. But if it's not doing that effectively, then the abdominal wall comes out and you see that bloat. So that's a really common cause of bloating. So working with these muscles, deep belly breathing, working with pelvic floor physio, osteopaths can be so helpful for this. We'll have a pelvic floor physiotherapist guest coming on our podcast soon. So we'll talk to her more about this. So keep your questions in mind. But this is like the floor of our abdomen. So at that final stage of bowel emptying, these muscles can be just not coordinated, and she'll bring this to life for all of us. She'll really walk us through how this works. But the gut moves forward through this motility, but the stool still needs a relaxed, coordinated pelvic floor to exit properly. So sometimes we can be too tense. Sometimes we're too relaxed. It really depends on how this is leading to constipation. It can lead to bowel emptying, gas buildup, and of course, bloating. And then we know when the stool sits longer in the colon, the bacteria that exists there normally have more time to ferment the leftovers. And this can increase gas abdominal distension. So it might not be dysbiosis. It may just be poor coordination of the muscles in that area. So something also to be considered is for those who have been pregnant, have carried a baby, any injury or surgery to that pelvic floor. We can hold tension in these muscles, so mental, emotional standpoint, and difficulty relaxing, as I said, or weakness there. So see your pelvic floor physio, breathing mechanics, Toileting posture is huge, and I'm sure the pelvic floor physio will walk us through this. Relaxation training can really help improve the coordination of these muscles and reduce constipation or related bloating. So those are all kind of the mechanisms and what we can do. So let's go through some practical takeaways from this episode. Christina, how about you get us started?
Okay, so slowing down. So slowing down the speed of eating, but also what we're doing while we're eating. So not eating distracted, gulping water, chewing too quickly, absorbing all of the extra air through the things that we're doing. And that may mean sitting down and having your fork sit down and also like chewing well so that you're swallowing something that your body can take the nutrients from. Remember, we want those microscopic little bits in our bloodstream. We also want to think about avoiding carbonated beverages and chewing gum, especially if we're finding that bloating is an issue, because some people just may not tolerate them very well or have some difficulty in breaking down that extra gas that's being absorbed in.
And we talked about supporting motility. So there's a number of ways that somebody can do that. The most common being, avoiding snacking in between meals, which we've talked about a lot. And thinking about leaving 2 to 3 hours of fasting to better support the migrating motor complex, which allows for food and gases to move through the gut, like that conveyor belt analogy we've discussed. Walking after meals can be really powerful for some people. The diaphragmatic breathing piece, yoga. The yoga poses, like the twisting poses, like there's certain ones that can be a bit more beneficial for just moving things through. Looking at portion sizes, sometimes overeating is a bit to our detriment, considering dividing large meals into smaller, spacing meals if there's large volume meals that are very much obviously cause symptoms. We talked about finishing eating 2 to 3 hours before lying down, especially after large meals. And even thinking about the distribution of calories, like is somebody's largest meal their dinner meal where it's like 70% of their daily calories, maybe we want to shift things a little bit earlier. And then lastly, working with a pelvic floor physiotherapist if somebody is bloated or constipated, or even like for things that feel like they've been missed. I had a patient post-pregnancy. She had the diastasis recti, which is where there's basically the abdominal, the abdomen is not as strong as it was before. So we see this bloating, but she also had a hernia that was undiagnosed. So yeah, making sure we're turning over every stone here.
Yeah, doesn't hurt to get a second follow-up or go see a practitioner just to kind of cover your bases. So this section is all about how to talk to your practitioner so you know how to bring this up if it's not getting better. So if you've done all the things we talked about today, spaced out your meals, you really slowed down, you're walking after your meals, we really want to highlight when to just not assume it's the lifestyle. So it's an important question of considering when it's not just these pieces. So if your bloating is persistent, if it's getting worse, doesn't improve with these basic changes, it's always worth chatting with your medical doctor, healthcare professional. Let them know if we don't want to cause concern, but especially the red flags we talked about in a previous episode, and explain weight loss, blood in the stool, if you're feeling nauseous all the time or you're vomiting consistently. Anytime there's pain, it can either be that visceral hypersensitivity or there could be something else going on, asking for some blood work. Any major change in bowel habit, it's always good to just say, hey, I've noticed this. I've been tracking it. This is what I've been doing. This is what I've noticed. Most bloating is typically pretty functional and manageable. We just don't want to ignore it because it can, as you know, from this season, it can be due to so many things. So here are some ways that you can talk to your doctor. I noticed consistent bloating after meals. I've worked on slowing my eating, spacing my meal times 3 hours apart. Can we look into other causes? And mention specific things like if you feel nauseous, heartburn or reflux after meals, lying down at night, any pain and what time of day and when that's coming on. And then ask your doctor if it's appropriate to eat 3 meals a day, or should you snack in between meals? Should meal sizes and time? So this can sometimes be a blood sugar piece or something else going on with your digestion.
Yeah, so we hope this episode gave you some tips on how to start with the basics for somebody's bloating. We want to try one change at a time. That's one of the biggest pieces of recommendations that we will typically discuss with our patients. So, for example, pausing carbonated drinks for a week, slowing down meals, reducing large portions, allowing a few hours between meals, or avoiding eating right before bed, and then tracking, because that data piece is quite important to be able to identify patterns, but also helps somebody's practitioner know what to do next.
Yeah, certainly you don't want to give up your carbonated beverages if that's not the issue. So bloating can certainly feel complicated. If you've been listening this far, you realize there's so many different reasons for bloating, but each thing has sort of more clues and information, and taking some first steps in being like, this is or isn't the cause, can be an easy way to get better information. Thank you for joining Team Gut Girls. And remember, better gut health changes everything. So we want you to have that too. Thank you for joining Team Gut Girls. Like, follow, subscribe, and share a podcast with friends you think will want to know more about their gut. You can also visit us at teamgutgirls.com for show transcripts and more information, because better gut health changes everything. See you next time.